Sorry about that. Good afternoon again, and a warm welcome to the session around the theme of emergence of purposeful philanthropy. We are joined by an eminent panel comprising both philanthropists and grantees. The moderator for the session is Mr. Sitaraman Shankar. Mr. Shankar, I'd like to briefly introduce you before requesting you to introduce the panelists and moderate the session.
Sure.
We'd also like to thank the Deccan Herald for being our media partners for the session. Mr. Sitaraman Shankar is the CEO of Printers Mysore Private Limited. He's also the editor of the Deccan Herald. In the 25 years that he has spent in journalism, Mr. Shankar has accumulated a wide range of experiences in developing emerging and frontier markets across various disciplines, be it reporting, feature writing, editing, news editing, and managing and working at India's Economic Times and then Reuters in Mumbai, Frankfurt, London, and Dubai. Other locations he has reported out of include Moscow, Vienna, and Singapore. He returned to India in July 2012 to take on a senior role at the Hindustan Times, where he oversaw its largest edition, ran coverage of the 2014 elections, and trained nearly 100 colleagues. At Network 18, which he joined in August of 2016, he led a revamp of India's largest financial site, Money Control, giving it a news focus and hiring over 50 journalists to set up a newsroom. Thank you all very much for being here this afternoon. Mr. Shankar, over to you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Napina. So we have a wonderful panel today. So I'll spend a quick minute introducing them. Not that they require too much introduction, but let me start with Mr. Amit Chandra, who is Managing Director and Chairman of Bain Capital Private Equity, member of the Financial and Business Services Vertical, and a member of the Asia Pacific Leadership Team. Prior to Bain, he was for a long time at DSP Merrill Lynch. And then he started off at, prior to his MBA, he was at Larsen & Toubro. So a long and distinguished career as a philanthropist and, of course, as a financial result. Orgo Sengupta is a founder and research director at Vidi Center of Legal Policies. Areas of specialization are constitutional law and regulation of the digital economy. Has served on a number of government committees, including the B.N. Krishna-led Committee on Experts on Data Protection Framework for India. His most recently authored book is The Independence and Accountability of the Indian Higher Judiciary, which builds on his doctoral work at Oxford. Ms. Anuaga will be joining us very soon on an audio link. Is a billionaire businesswoman and social worker who's led Thermax, an energy and environment engineering business, as its chairperson from 1996 to 2004. She is currently board member of Teach for India. And of course, Ms. Shaheen Mistry is CEO of Teach for India. Shaheen launched Teach for India in 2008. And since then, the organization has recruited, trained, and placed nearly 1,700 fellows in schools across 7 cities. So welcome to all of you. It's wonderful having such a distinguished panel. I think it will be a great learning experience for me, and I think that we should be able to get some very interesting insights from the next half an hour or so. So the way we see this working out is in the next half an hour, give or take 5 minutes, we'll try and piece together what builds a successful relationship between a funder and a fundee or a grantee. What sort of partnership evolves? I mean, how it gets stronger and stronger? What are the challenges in it? What are the major stumbling blocks that you need to overcome? And how do you resolve conflict? How does it, when you do hit these occasional roadblocks, how do you overcome them? How do you get around them if you want? What does each look for in each other? And if we have a little bit of extra time, I think we have an hour, we'll look at some specific questions for the panelists, each of whom comes with a very strong background in philanthropy. So let me start. I think, do we have Anu yet? Or should we just give it? I think we should get underway, should we? Or yeah, I think there is an audience. So let me start off with a very basic question for the funders and the fundees. So what does an organization look for in a funder? Let me go to Shaheen and Orgo first. And Shaheen, maybe you can lead off on this one.
Such a nice question, and so nice to be here with all of you. I think, in an ideal world, you look for someone who shares a similar vision for what the organization wants to change. I think if that is solid, if there's really alignment that like, here is what we really want to shift together, even if there are differences in how to get there, you can work through them. So I think to me, that's the most fundamental. If I were to add a little bit to that, I would say a level of trust, the ability to make mistakes on both sides and work together despite that, and a feeling of partnership. I think often when money is involved, there is a power dynamic, and that is difficult. So however much a funder can truly make you feel like this is a partnership, we're bringing different things of equal value to it.
Wonderful. That's nice and crisp, and I think it gives us a really good idea. So, Olgo, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I think Shaheen's pretty much said what had to be said. I'll just add a couple of things in terms of what I think an early stage entrepreneur really looks at. And I think if we unpack this idea of what is a partner, I think this is pretty much hitting the nail on the head. Because I think what an early stage entrepreneur looks for, and certainly I look for when we were starting out, as in is essentially a person who not only funds, but a person with whom you can have an honest relationship. And you can talk to them about things you've achieved, and you talk to them about things that you haven't achieved. And I think it's very critical to understand that this is not a relationship where you have to say that this is 10 on 10 on everything, okay? Because then pretty much that's a relationship that's based on dishonesty. So I think if we were to unpack this idea of partnership, I would say that the first element, which as an early stage entrepreneur I look for, is someone who I could be perfectly honest with, bounce ideas of, talk about successes as well as talk about failures and how we can do them. And I think that's the first. And the second, and I think this is something that we often shy away from this, but I think it's got to be said that right at the beginning, as in what someone like me look for, is really organizational support in terms of funding. Okay, I think this is very critical that a lot of funders are interested in particular program areas, and that's great. And if there is an alignment, they're super, nothing better. But what I think in the early stage, I'm thinking back to 2013, 14, 15, what we really look for is people who could provide capacity building support. Because the organization has to pay salaries, it has to do all the non-sexy stuff of ensuring that rent is paid, and so on. And it's difficult to actually get funders who understand that, because it's not something that is sort of immediately putting food in someone's mouth or is actually teaching arithmetic to somebody. So it's so I think at the early stage, organizations do require capacity building funding and gentle conversations and a lot of honesty.
Okay, so from Shaheen and you, I'm hearing the need for honesty, need for trust between funder and fundee, feeling of partnership, easy power dynamic, partnership of equals, and of course you mentioned someone you can be honest with and comfortable with. I think that kind of chimes with what Shaheen is saying. It's an easy relationship, and of course you mentioned this business about the humdrum but very important stuff that needs funding, and you want an understanding from your funder of that. I think that's an important point. I don't think Anu is here yet, but Amit, can we switch this to the funder side? What do you look for in an organization that you're going to fund?
Thank you, Shankar. Shankar, I do think what we look for today is not a static view. It has evolved a lot over the last decade or two that we've been involved with the social sector. And I think a lot of what both Shaheen and Arghya said resonated with me. I think first and foremost, our view has changed from looking at organizations as NGOs to being developmental partners. I don't think we don't use the word NGOs anymore. We use the word developmental partners when we look at them. And the reason we use that term is because effectively every organization we work with is really helping us realize the dream of what we want to see in the world around us. So I think the first thing we really look for in every organization we work with is, do we think that working with them we can together realize the dreams that we aspire for. Um, I think there are a number of other things that both of them touched upon that I think are very important. Because the word partnership in that term is very important to us, the honesty in the relationship becomes very important. I think we are absolutely fine hearing good news from in terms of just emails and updates here, from the market. But I think it's very important for us to hear about things that go wrong firsthand. I think that honesty in that relationship is very important to us. Um, when we start the relationship, I think it's very important for us to assess commitment and perseverance. I think that becomes less important over time once the relationship gets established. Um, I think because of the point we are at today, I think it because we are really trying to make systemic impact. It's very important for us to assess what the theory of change is and whether the organization is really capable of delivering systemic impact, and whether it has um, inbuilt mechanism to both share knowledge openly, and to advocate how it is basically what it is learning and how it is going to impact systems. Also its ability to kind of drive partnerships. So I think some of those things to us are really really important.
Thank you, Amit. So now let's look at this as a fundy pair. Unfortunately, Shaheen, I think you'll have to wait a bit. But let's look at Orgo and Amit. So, what what's the relationship like, and how has it survived the down moments? I presume there have been some. All relationships have down ones. But would you say that you've achieved the best version of what you can do together? What remains to be done? I'm sure again there's a long way ahead. But can you dilate a bit on that? Orgo, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think everything remains to be done. As in, if you just look at I think what we work on at Ziggy is writing better laws for India. And I think there is a long, long way to go. And I don't think this race does have a finishing line, right? So I think we're just kind of starting on this journey. But I was actually, when this question was put to me earlier as in one of the dry runs, as in I actually looked back to what, I mean, just thinking back to the first time I did meet him. And he had asked me a question, which was, why do you do what you do? And I still remember this very clearly. It's a very simple question. And I had a ready spiel, because I wanted money. So I had a ready spiel as to what I do. But that's the first time I said that, what we do is we write better laws for India. And that was really uh, what I thought captured our mission very, very succinctly. And over time, and I think what has happened, and this is testimony to what you said in terms of how the relationship survives, I think it survives and flourishes because of two clear reasons. One is the fact that what I get from Amit is always a new insight, a new way of looking at things. We come from different backgrounds, and I think as someone had told me when I was trying to start with he said that, oh, you won't be able to start it. Lawyers are not entrepreneurs. Lawyers are like shopkeepers. So because we run kind of small shops of 5-7 people each. Okay. So the fact is that so what I get from Amit all the time is an insight into the way in which we look at things. And I'll give you one example and I'll stop there because I think that captures it better than me rambling on other things. Is that very early on we did a project in relation to drug abuse in Punjab. We know that the drug problem in Punjab has gone through the roof, and it's a whole generation that's getting wiped out because of addiction issues. And we wanted to study it to see what's happening. There is a criminal law in place, the NDPS Act, which prescribes all these punishments. But why is it that things are not coming down? And we did this really fancy report. We got a lot of traction, a lot of people saying things. But the fact is, and we got a lot of media traction on that as well. I think Amit said one thing which I remember is the fact that maybe you should do another version of this for the common person. This is a version for the people, the intelligentsia, and that's great because that's necessary. But this change will not happen overnight. This change, on if we were to look at drugs not as a criminal law issue but as a public health issue, this will take time. And so I think this was a tremendous insight, because this is something that we did not only with drugs, but with everything across later. And I think this is really what the strength of that relationship has been, which is that the ability to get insights from a very different perspective. And I'll leave Amit to talk about the downsides.
Okay, but before we go there, I mean, before you met Amit and this funding relationship started, you must have gone elsewhere, or did you not, in search of funding?
Yes,
Now,
absolutely.
where did some of those conversations fall down?
Yeah, I think, see, there's one thing that we must realize, and I know that in Charcha there are a whole universe of entrepreneurs who are here, but there is a larger universe of entrepreneurs who are not here. Okay, and the fact is that I think I find myself to be fortunate. As in, I was when I wanted to start Vidhi, I was a lecturer in law at Oxford University, and this was very easy to open doors. Okay, and I realized that people don't have these networks, and even for me, it took a while, because whatever, my networks weren't sort of in the world of business or philanthropy, but it took a while. So I think the first thing that we must realize is that there is a lot of perseverance that takes place right at the outset, because there are very few funders who back an idea. There are a lot of funders who back something that's running, but very few back an idea. Number one. Number two is that I think it's really, really critical on those days. And I remember I used to live in Kandivli, and I used to go to sort of South Bombay, sometimes by train and sometimes by car. And it was, as in most of these days, there were these 2.5 hours. I was stuck in traffic. For everyone who knows Bombay, it took me sometimes 3 hours to go there, and you'd come back at the end of the day saying, "Why the hell am I doing this?" Because you're not going to get anything out of this. So there were a lot of these days. So second thing is you have to hang in there. And the third thing, which is really something for funders, and I think this is something that's interesting, because I speak to a lot of charities who find it much harder than us to raise funding. And I think it's really important for existing funders to at least introduce charities that they support, development partners, to one other person. And I think that's how the network kind of grows. Support is great, but I think everyone needs networks to grow. So it's a long, hard struggle, and I think you just have to stay the course and hang in.
Right, Amit, what's your side of this? It's clearly you fund a lot of people.
So, Shankar, I'll make 2 points. One is when you're tackling very difficult problems, unlike in the corporate world where you have line of sight to early results. I think you often need to take a much more longer term view, and I think often people lose sight of that. So we understand, and I've learned this, the hard way. That I was much more impatient in the social sector in my first 10 years. I can tell you that. So when you find a good, dedicated bunch of people who are dedicating their life to solving difficult issues, I think you got to be humble and give them space. So our engagement with Vidhi, for example, and we have similar engagement with a lot of people, is to invest in two different ways. One is we do invest in their capacity. We are not a large, trust like Tata Trust or Azim Premji. We are a small family foundation. So we find that it's very valuable to invest in their capacity. So we've invested in their fundraising capability. We've invested in their communication capability over the years. We find those are high multiplier areas, which unfortunately other people don't invest in. But if you get it right, you can actually make a big impact on an organization. And I urge funders to give unrestricted grants to organizations in those areas. And we've now demonstrated by doing this with at least 30 or 40 organizations that if you get that right, you can actually materially impact the fortune of organizations that you partner with. The second thing I would say, to the point that you made about ups and downs, there are some very difficult areas that Vidhi tackles that we have the privilege of working with them on. My wife and I are very passionate about, trying to do whatever we can on the area of gender violence. Now, we have different ways in which we support organizations. We work with some grassroots organizations in that area. But one of the ways in which we try to approach that is by working with Vidhi on the criminal justice system.
Mhm.
And it's a very interesting way, but we know that that's a difficult approach and a difficult lens to take. Now, I can tell you that we have milestones that obviously are set for Vidhi. And I know that Arkeo feels terrible every time he reports back to us and says, I have not met those milestones. I know the team that reports to me feels terrible when they get back and say that Vidhi did not meet those milestones. But this is where our judgment comes in, that it's not necessarily their fault, that it's an entire ecosystem that is engaged with that. That of course, if they had the ability to deal with things in a perfect world, things would move faster. And I know that there are not many members in their team who would love to move things faster so that we would have a more just system dealing with gender violence. And so I think that's where you need to exhibit some degree of judgment and maturity when you're dealing with difficult issues.
So,
I can see a wonderful
Anu
face
has
on the
arrived.
screen.
Yes. Just to take you up on that. So, I mean, it depends on, I guess, your comfort level with the partner. This judgment on. I mean, you could also take a harder view if, I suppose, people were in the initial stage of their relationship not meeting milestones.
Yes,
You
and
may
we
have
have
taken.
we
Yeah.
have taken a harder view, but we've
Yeah.
taken a harder view where we believe that it's warranted, that people have, it's because of lack of effort as opposed to intent.
Sure. So I think Anu has joined us right on time. Is this the message recording or okay? Anu, are you there or okay? I think Anu has a message for our session that it'll be an audio clip, so it's almost as good as a real thing. But Shaheen, I think over to you. The same question. What's the relationship been like with Anu, and how has it survived the down moments? What have you done to get over these few moments that haven't been ideal?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, before I get to Anu, I have such a long history with Amit, so it's just quite incredible to be on this panel with both of you. But the one insight as I was just listening, as I think both about Amit and Anu, and then I'll go more into the relationship with Anu, is like I've realized the most important thing to me in a relationship with a funder is the human being that funder is. And I think having had the vantage point of knowing Amit and Anu for a couple of decades now and seeing that evolution, not just professionally, but the way they conduct their personal lives, just the role models that they are in terms of the courage to be different. I think that's one thing I would say, both about Amit and Anu, that to walk the less trodden path. There have been many moments in my relationship with Anu where I've seen her stand up and say things with such honesty, it's almost taken my breath away, and I've said, my gosh, did Anu really say that, but that level of integrity and humanity, and willingness to like walk the talk is what I think has been most characteristic about the relationship. And so honestly, much more than the tremendous support to the organization, as someone leading the organization through a roller coaster of ups and downs, I think having funders who are such role models as human beings has taught me a lot of not just the skills, but the values, the mindsets, the way of looking at life, that have been so essential in staying in the work over time. And so that's really the most important thing I wanted to say. I mean, the journey with Anu has been Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how to describe it in words. I'm going back to the first time that I met Anu at the Willingdon Club in Mumbai, and she came with pages, I think, at least to me, it seemed like pages of questions about Akanksha, many of them such micro questions that as the head of the organization, I'd never even thought about answers to these questions, and Amit is probably smiling because he's been a huge questioner in my life as well. I think one of the people that has challenged me absolutely the most in through many years of building Akanksha. So I think they've played really important roles as being the forces that have challenged my leadership, and given me very, very honest, very direct feedback. Sometimes that feedback has felt a little bit hurtful as well, and there's been some emotion attached to it. And then at the same time, but with an even greater amount, just showered me with like unconditional love and support. And to me, it's been that balance of like, can the same person who can really challenge you also like stick their neck out for you when it really matters, be there in the difficult times, through the crises, show that unconditional support, but still almost in the same breath ask the difficult questions. That's how I would most characterize, I think, my relationship.
So again, well, obviously there's been no insurmountable roadblock, but where was the closest you came to kind of, where did this conversation get really very difficult? I mean, for anyone, no, I mean, not just Shaheen, but...
We have very regular, difficult conversations, as Amit.
I think we've just lost audio, have we?
Just give him a second.
Yeah.
Cases in relation to rape and domestic violence are actually heard and disposed of quickly without affecting other cases. Okay, so this is as you can imagine, this is a complicated exercise of intelligent scheduling of cases. It involves training and sensitization of judges. It involves creating courtrooms which have physical infrastructure that is gender sensitive. Now, this involves the judiciary, which has all the right intentions, but is a cautious institution of state, much more cautious than others. And we have regular 3-month discussions with Amit and his team where there are milestones. And as Amit rightly said, these milestones, as we feel terrible, but these milestones are missed quite often. And sometimes they are missed because of someone else, and sometimes they are missed because we didn't try hard enough. And I think that sort of makes us feel terrible, as if someone points it out. But I think, and as Shaheen was saying this, as in it was resonating, that at that moment it's very hurtful to hear this, But I think it's extremely essential to hear this, because that's what ultimately spurs us to do better. Of course, some things could be someone else's problem, but that's a cop-out. As in, what can we do, given the constraints in which we all operate, to ensure that we are doing our hardest? And that's where I think, and this is a sort of slightly different point from what we've been making earlier, is that this professional approach that a new age funder, and Amit is I would classify him as a new age funder, and there are several, because he's really taken the lead in this. But this professional approach to philanthropy is really something that makes the sector better, that makes us a better version of ourselves, and I think does away with this tag of the developmental sector being unprofessional. Okay, and I think that's where, and I do believe that what Amit was saying is very important, that we are not primarily NGOs. Why should we be determined by what we are not? We are not government. Yeah, we are not government. No one's saying we are government. We are part of the developmental sector, and since this is an event of the developmental sector, I thought this is a good opportunity that maybe when I was preparing for this, I thought maybe we should call ourselves India.org, like we have India Inc. To call World of Business, because we need to be seen as a coherent sector that is doing work for the community, but is doing it professionally.
Amit, I was going to ask you what are the sort of performance metrics you monitor, and at a point in time when you have developed a lot of trust, do you just let go? But from what Orgo says, you seem to keep a very beady eye on him and on other fundies. Is that the case?
Uh, that's a very good question, Shankar. Um, I know there's this great debate going on right now that you should just completely let go. Um, no, we don't completely let go. I think we don't let go because we are partners, and we want to know what's going on. We want to, and so and we also believe that to some extent we can contribute to change with some of the knowledge that we have by being engaged in a lot of areas. So um, we don't completely let go. We do have dashboards by which we monitor things that we are engaged with. But I don't think we are obtrusive. So I don't think I know that there are a lot of donors, many CSR folks in particular, who kind of try to be engaged sometimes, in a kind of a unnecessarily obtrusive manner. That's not our intent. If we don't try to ask unnecessary questions. We want to be informed, and where we can contribute, we try to contribute.
Sure, I think that kind of neatly leads, and in fact, you've answered part of it. Top 2 to 3 reasons why a relationship between a funder and a fundee runs aground. What's your view on that? Anu can come in now. I think it's just okay.
Yeah.
Can we just take that question and then move on to Anu?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, dishonesty, and as Shaheen rightly put it, when trust breaks down, I think it's probably the biggest reason why things actually go aground. I would say that's probably the 80-20 of the problem. Um, I think everything else in my mind is trivial.
Right. So I think comfort level, trust, mutual understanding, I think is something which we've been hearing through the last 30 odd minutes. I think that's an important point. I think that's where it all seems to get built or broken. Anu, nice to have you with us. Is this Anu live or Anu on recording? Can we hear?
Uh, I'm sorry I cannot be with you today, and I'll do my best. What is my relationship with Shaheen? When I met Shaheen the first time in Mumbai about 25 years ago, I was full of admiration for her passion, commitment, love for kids. Shaheen was 18 when she came to India, having lived abroad, and the kids who were on the streets not going to school really bothered her, and she decided not to go to the US and start Akanksha. Her enthusiasm rubbed on me. I often tease her about her Western accent. Over time, we've become very good friends, but that does not stop us from giving each other honest and authentic feedback, and the relationship has matured and strengthened. We are there for each other through good and bad times, and I love her and want her to succeed. What is my motivation for giving? My son, who died at 25, wanted substantial amounts of our income to give for social causes. After his demise, I was looking for a credible NGO, and everyone suggested I meet Shaheen. So that was a motivation. Wealth from a distance seems very glamorous, but you soon realize it does not give you satisfaction, and you can get trapped in the rat race and becoming a rat yourself. And I certainly didn't want to end up being a rat. I strongly believe in Gandhiji's suspicious model, and as I read about it, that motivated me. And by training, I'm a social worker, and I knew that basic health and education after 75 years of independence are totally neglected, and the amount of money allocated in the budget is business. Quality of education and health is very poor. Since I met Shaheen and was motivated by her work, I was keen to support her. At Akanksha, I saw the impact they were having on kids, not just academically, but values, sport, theatre, and making people good human beings. What are the long-term changes I expect through philanthropy? Through Teach for India, which is what Shaheen started after Akanksha, we are touching the lives of almost 1 in 10 children through the fellowship Alum. We are working towards influencing government policy through alums working within the government. Shaheen has played a role in framing the new education policy. And for example, there is a lot of talk about opening schools, and we are advocating for it. So we are hoping through the long-term education, quality of education will dramatically improve for every child in India. How does philanthropy support changes at the NGO role and scale? Initially, a startup NGO like TFI relies on philanthropists for funding since it has no ATG or FCRS. Thereafter, it relies on the donor for strategic input, connections to raise funds, and advocacy. Over time, you may want to reduce your funding to that NGO or give it to some other area. For example, we are talking about giving less to TFI but giving more to the Alum. What do philanthropists look for in entrepreneurs? The most important is credibility, trust, passion, commitment, transparency, not hiding mistakes, creativity, ability to grow. Just writing a check is not at all satisfying for me. I like being involved in many different ways, and Shaheen involves the board in many creative ways. What is very satisfying is interacting with the kids, and I've learned a lot from them. We often say NGOs can learn from corporates, but I think the way TFI board is run, corporates can learn how to be creative and do your work, but also have fun. How should philanthropists support patient practice? Causes like governance, education do not show results overnight. You can see the marks the children get, but you don't see the impact it has made on the education center. At Akanksha, we have defined our vision, not just doing well in exams, but pulling the kids out of poverty, which means investing for the long term. And for that, you need a lot of patience and not expect the results immediately. I'm very sorry once again, and thank you for giving me a chance.
Thank you. That was wonderful from Anu. Unfortunately, not able to be with us today, but that was a really inspiring message. So she mentioned something about corporates learning from NGOs. Now, Orgo, do you just want to take that? What do you think some of the lessons that it's going the other way, but what are the lessons that corporates can draw from your experience?
This is a hard one for me. I think you should ask Amit. I've
never
been in the corporate sector. As in, this is something I don't have an answer to, except to say one thing, and I can only go back to perhaps the greatest corporate leader of them all, Jamshedji Tata. And this is something that there was an interesting episode where Sorry, there's a lot of rain and thunder here, so there's a little bit of disturbance. But there is an interesting episode where Swami Vivekananda was on a ship when he was going to Chicago. He was on the ship with Jamshedji Tata, and Jamshedji Tata told him that his biggest mission in life was to set up India's first postgraduate research university in science, something that he couldn't do for a long period of time. And Swami Vivekananda, once Jamshedji Tata passed away, Swami Vivekananda said that that was the greatest idea that any Indian ever had. And this came from a man of business. And I think if we look at Jamshedji Tata and his writing and the biographies on him, I think what you can see there is that the need for research, the need for understanding new frontiers of knowledge, the need for passion, which is all of what is the social sector brought, and he's kind of the creator of that in the social sector. That's what made the Tatas who they are today, and it continues to be the case today. So I think what I can say, looking at and this reading of Jamshedji Tata, is that the passion, the belief in an idea, and the firm belief that that India needs this. This is something that the social sector has, and Jamshedji Tata channelized it beautifully for not only the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, which is the leading institution till this date, but also in creating the House of Tatas, which is much more than just a business house.
Wonderful. Shaheen, what are some of the ideas that corporates have got from the NGO you run, or the institution you run? I should ask them, I know.
I mean, you should ask that to Anu, maybe. I mean, I can share one that Nisa Godrej is our current chair of our board. And one of the things that she sort of says with a big smile is that when we first started talking about love is a core value at Teach for India, she would really wonder if there was something wrong with us, it just seemed a little bit off. And she said now she's understood so much the power of that value, to be able to love what you do, the people around you, yourself, that she very much uses it now in Godrej and feels that her whole approach to people and the work has shifted. So I think that's one example. But I think sometimes, at least with NGO boards, where we're a little bit more able to do things that are a little bit creative, a little bit different, bring people a little bit more proximate to the ground. So I think things that have worked have been bringing voices from the ground into board meetings, getting the board to engage in ways that a teacher would engage in a classroom, different types of methodology, really fun, which I think is a very underrated value, right? We understand the need for fun and joy when you're young. We sort of underestimate the value of just fun and joy when you're older as an adult. And I think we try to bring a lot of that into our board meetings now at Teach for India as well. So I would say, yeah, just the ability to live a wider range of values, to blur the personal and professional a little bit, and just to be able to be yourself in a space and connect at a deep level.
Wonderful. I actually had a question for Amit, but maybe we should go to the audience first. I think we are up to 45 minutes now. So can someone help me with surfacing some of the questions? Okay, shall I just ask? I think we have a question from Sudeep Khare. In terms of the scale of funding, government could be one of the biggest sources. How do funder-fundee relations with government contrast with that with private entities and foundations? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I could take that actually, because this question has come up a number of times as to how should you look at government. I would like to see the government primarily as the biggest change agent in the country. And from my line of work, as in the amount of change that the government can bring is unparalleled. And we talk about scale a lot in these discussions, as in the amount of scale that can be brought through a wise implementation of a policy that is rolled out and implemented well is great. So I see government primarily as a change agent. In terms of funding relationships with government, then I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because number one, as a new organization, it's something that you can't do usually because it comes with a whole range of compliance requirements, including for CAG audits. I'm just getting into the brass tacks of it. So it's actually you're going to spend a lot of money on compliance to do that. And number two, there is a real question, and this depends on your relationships, of course, in terms of safeguarding your independence and your autonomy. I think you certainly want to safeguard your independence and autonomy at all points of time. I'm not saying this is a government-only problem. It could happen with a private funder as well, but certainly with the government, as in the sort of the relative fear of a lack of autonomy, together with heavy compliance, means that we at least see them primarily as the biggest change agents in the country and not a potential source of serious grant funding.
Either of you want to add to that, Shaheen, Amit?
Yeah, if I could just add, I agree with Argyo. I feel that I completely agree, first of all, that it is the government's responsibility to be the largest change agent. And in fact, I think the philanthropic sector, supporting the developmental sector, uh, even if it puts in its full might, will not be able to make a dent on our social problems if the government doesn't do its job. But then the question is, what is the role of the philanthropic sector and the developmental sector? I think the role is to do two things in my mind. One is to better inform government spending, and the second is to make it more accountable. And so I think the important thing is to figure out how to create templates of change, which can be easily infused into government policies. Often, government programs tend to be either very wasteful, um, or they governments never innovate, rarely innovate. So I think it's important for organizations to prove what can work, and second is to actually advocate so that accountability for government spending actually vastly improves. And I think that should be the role that the not-for-profit sector and foundations actually go out and play very, very actively.
Excellent. So Shraddha Bagwe asks, how should someone new to the impact sector connect with funders and build relationships? Amit, I guess that's for you.
We don't do much of early stage. There are a lot of people who do early stage. We do some early stage, so maybe I'll take a stab at it. Um, Look, there are obviously, one of the things that we do is we encourage, we try to encourage building platforms, um, like Give India is an example of that. Wherein organizations can access funding, and Give India has dramatically scaled up over the years. Of course, we're also trying to do is figure out ways in which other platforms get built. Many years ago, we were involved in funding, encouraging a platform called Dana Mojo, which is again recently scaled up. It's got a big grant from Rohini Nilantani Philanthropies. It's great to see other platforms come up as well. So there are we are involved in platform creations which help early stage entrepreneurs get access to funding. I do think at a basic level, the best way for anyone to get funding is to actually approach someone in their ecosystem and convince them, because that's where most journeys typically begin. um, it's easiest to really get someone to back you if there is one degree of separation. And I would say, for anyone to really at least uh, convince someone based on, some degree of familiarity is probably the best way to begin that journey before you really get onto a platform.
So you have a track record of having lent to underserved areas, to funding unproven ideas. What makes you do this? And I'm sure a lot of underserved areas and what's the phrase, unproven ideas out there. So just for that benefit, what's it about you, and what's it about your way of thinking that makes you more amenable to this?
So Shankar, it actually came out of a strategy project we did many years ago, where we said there was a lot of money that was going into. We actually looked at a pie chart of where of money was going, and we discovered that even though there was obviously a lot of need for funding in health and education, we realized that there were areas which were completely underfunded, despite the fact that the needs were enormous. Um, and so Archana and I asked ourselves the question as to, while the needs there are enormous, who's going to actually step in and meet some of these needs? And so we decided to focus disproportionately on two of those needs. One was rural development, which is working with farmers, and the other is capacity building, which we could touch a lot of causes. We also decided to focus on a few other things very selectively. Gender violence was one, urban governance was the other. Um, we've also, through capacity building, focused on other underserved areas. I mean, one of our oldest associations has been Olympic Gold Quest. I remember started, backing Olympic Gold Quest just around the time when Viren joined them as the CEO. Um, and it's wonderful to see now that half our Olympic medals are won by athletes backed by them. And again, it was basically because no one was really investing in sports at that point of time. So uh, we do like the notion of basically via our capacity building vertical, choosing things that nobody is really focusing on, but doing that through the capacity building route.
Sure. A couple of questions have just popped up. Joju Verghese has how are funders looking towards sustainability in development organizations? How is sustainability defined in the social development sector? So I think there's a preponderance of questions to funders as opposed to fundees. So Amit, I think it's you again.
I think you should ask Shaheen and argue that. Look, the issue of sustainability is a big area of concern. Um, we've been sponsoring some research in this area. The data is shocking. By the way, it's terrible in the West, and it's even worse in India. And I would define sustainability as just how much capital an average NGO has in India to be able to live through a crisis. And I think COVID was an example of that, where many of them had to shutter basic programs, and in many cases were unable to pay even salaries of employees, as a consequence of which we had mass layoffs. Um, I do personally believe that with many of the organizations that we work, we have an active program where we try to at least make sure that they have somewhere between 1 to 2 years of expenses in terms of cash in the bank, and that they work with their core donors to get to that. It's a journey. It's not easy to do that, but they need to convince their core donors that that's an very necessary objective that their donors need to support. Um, it needs to happen by actually making sure that every um, offering that you have is appropriately costed. And this is a mind shift change that donors need to understand. And we are trying to basically put out the right research We're working with Britspan on something called Pay What It Takes. It's a collective that we have put together with the Gates Foundation, Edelgive, the Rohini Nilankani Foundation, us, and a few others, Central Square Foundation, where we actually trying to convince all the major donors in the country to sign up for this and then put the data out to get them to understand that unless we do this, we will not have a vibrant social sector in the country.
Shaheen, it must have been a tough 18 months for the sector in general, given COVID. How do you answer this sustainability question?
I mean, so it's interesting to hear your thoughts, Amit, around like what sustainability is. For me, like the 1 to 2 year piece, as you said, it's even for an older organization, it's a journey, and it's really tough to have 2 years money in the bank and to get donors to understand that. So really heartened to hear about the effort to shift that narrative. But I'm also thinking about like, what does it mean over time to lessen your dependency on donors? And are we thinking creatively enough is a question I'm always asking myself around revenue generation without compromising the stakeholders we want to serve, right? So in TFI and Akanksha, we could always move sort of one level of higher income in terms of the kids we serve and be able to generate revenue. But if we still want to work with the poorest children in urban India right now, what is the mechanism to think creatively about sustainability, especially when we know there are pain points in funding? So, for example, programmatic funding feels much easier to get than non-program, administrative, unrestricted. So if we could even become sustainable for those pain points, I think it would help a lot. And I'm wondering if that is a conversation that's happening in the country or potentially needs to happen, where we really think innovatively about what does it mean to lessen our dependence. Because I think donors, I mean, Anu mentioned this as well, like donors after a certain number of years also feel that there is a risk of over dependence, right, on a single donor. But where does that leave an organization that doesn't know how to reduce dependence overall on donors? So I think that's the dilemma to really think through.
Super. I think we have time possibly for one more, maybe 1.5 more. What is Parikshit Menon asks, how does one nudge corporates other than the Tatas, Birlas of this world to look at CSR less as a tax stroke compliance and more of a being integral to business? I think this is squarely in your territory, Amit. How do you nudge? And I was waiting for that word to emerge at some point, nudge.
I think it goes back to Arghyo's point on Jamshedji Tata. I think it'll have to come from within. I mean, Jamshedji Tata is my inspiration as well. He was a trailblazer who did what he did, and then Dorabji Tata followed him in doing what he did well before things became fashionable, even in the West, right? And then for nearly a century, we basically haven't seen anything of that sort happen. Even actually, very little of it happened in the West, forget in the East. So I do believe personally that these things, I think, have to come from the inside. You know, what suddenly Azim Premji decided to do it. I do believe, that it will happen here, but it will happen with probably a new generation of entrepreneurs. It'll happen more, even more amongst professionals. Very quietly, I think a number of professionals in this country are actually giving more than many of our entrepreneurs and industrialists are giving. I think probably Shaheen and Arghyo know that. And so I think the change happens from within. It's hard to explain always what inspires it. But I think once it happens, it then, if it reaches a critical mass, it becomes a way of life. And I'm actually very bullish about philanthropy in India in the next, 5 to 10 years. Very, very bullish, because I see us getting to a tipping point.
And that's a fantastic note on which to end. Actually, we've just tipped over the 1 hour mark. So thank you very, very much, Shaheen, Anu, Amit, and Orgyo. And